This is the CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in New York. President Trump just announced via social media Kristi Noem is out as Homeland Security Secretary. The president said in that same post that he is nominating Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin to be her replacement. I want to turn now to Nancy Cordes, our chief White House correspondent, who joins us from North Lawn. Nancy?
Major, after about 24 hours of speculation, the president, as he likes to do, just made the announcement himself via Truth Social, saying that he was going to be putting Markwayne Mullin, the senator from Oklahoma, in charge of the Department of Homeland Security and essentially demoting, not firing, but reassigning Kristi Noem to what he described as special envoy for the Shield of the Americas, which he said is a new security initiative in the Western Hemisphere that he plans to announce on Saturday in Florida. This caps several days of controversy over an answer that Kristi Noem gave to senators in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing the other day, in which she was asked about a $200 million ad campaign starring her that she had produced as Secretary of Homeland Security, in which she urged people living here in the country illegally to self-deport. She was asked if the president knew that she was going to spend that kind of money on that ad campaign. She said yes, the president himself had signed off on it. Well, we began to hear through sources that the president hadn't signed off on it, and that he was, unhappy with the answer that Noem had given. She was already, we understand, on thin ice given the handling of arrests in Minneapolis, Minnesota, over the past couple of months, and then the president announcing just a few minutes ago, Major, that he is indeed replacing her, which is a major piece of news given how reluctant he has been to reassign or fire any cabinet level officials in his second term. As you know better than anyone, Major, he fired a lot of cabinet members in his first term, but this time around, he's been much more reluctant to do so. And
Nancy, we should underscore this will require a confirmation process for Markwayne Mullin, the senator from Oklahoma, because he's a sitting senator. That is assumed to be much more easy than someone who is not a member of the body. But we also should remind our viewers that currently, because of an impasse over DHS funding, the agency over which Kristi Noem used to oversee, and then Markwayne Mullin, if he's confirmed, will oversee, is still absent full fiscal year funding. That standoff continues. Correct. And some Democrats have already said this morning, Major, that it might be easier to negotiate a way out of this impasse if Noem is no longer at the helm of the Department of Homeland Security, if they are working with other officials, if they're talking to their colleague at this moment, Markwayne Mullin, who was dogged by reporters in the halls of Congress just today, said he hadn't spoken to the president, didn't give anything away. You're right that he will likely have an easier confirmation process because he is so well known to these senators. And of course, Oklahoma is a deep red state, which means that his seat is not necessarily in any danger of turning from Republican to Democrat, which is another reason that he was probably an attractive candidate for the president for this role. And just to cue our audience in on how this was such a fast-moving circumstance on Capitol Hill today, about 2 hours ago, reporters encountered Senator Mullin, and he said, I haven't talked to the president at all. I've got no comment on this. The president supports Secretary Noem. I support Secretary Noem. And then according to our email traffic, Nancy, by my vision, about 10 minutes before the social media post that came from the president announcing that Kristi Noem was out, Senator Mullin engaged with reporters again and said, I just talked to the president. And then, boom, announcement came. Yeah. And, that mirrors the fact that the president has been talking to reporters this morning, as have some of his top aides, saying a variety of things as well, implying that he was not happy but hadn't made up his mind about what to do about Noem's leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, then indicate that he probably was going to fire her, and then culminating with this announcement that the president made on Truth Social that he is indeed moving her off of that role and to another one. Nancy, one other point to make. This is a personnel matter, and it's always of interest to the nation and the country when a cabinet secretary is sidelined. But There's a war going on in the Middle East. The Department of Homeland Security is the lead agency in monitoring and creating information for states and localities to deal with the threat matrix, which is clearly in a different posture than it was a week ago. And now it will be without a Senate-confirmed cabinet secretary.
It certainly will, and these are, even a fast-moving confirmation process takes time in the Senate major, and that's not to mention the fact that there are also positions open overseas as well, important ambassadorships in the Middle East that have not been filled, that we know have been slowing communication, as you would expect, between the U.S. and those countries. Things just move a lot more smoothly when you have ambassadors installed in countries that are very important. So, this creates another headache for the administration, even if they know who is going to hold that job eventually.
And Nancy, one last point. After the death of Alex Preddy, which came after the death of Renee Good on the streets of Minneapolis, the president dispatched Tom Homan, his White House immigration czar, and that was not a full-blown sidelining of Kristi Noem as DHS secretary, who was leading the charge in Minneapolis, but it was clearly interpreted in the agency and in Washington as pushing her out of the way and less in the spotlight. That was a sort of foreshadowing of the difficulty she was in, culminating in today's news.
Yes, and it has always been a sort of delicate situation because on one hand, there were those within the White House who were arguing that in Minneapolis, the aggressive things that Noem was doing and saying were at the behest of the president's right-hand man, his deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller. And, and so she pushed back at that time and said, I was really just doing what I had been encouraged to do. And that's why, while she was sort of moved off of that assignment and kind of refocused on the border, there wasn't a move at that time to let her go. But one of the cardinal sins with this president is to say publicly that he did something that he insists he didn't do. And that appears to have been the final straw and what led to her being ousted as Secretary of Homeland Security. Really
grateful to Nancy Cordes for all the help on this. Once again, to reiterate, President Trump has fired Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary, giving her another job, intending to replace her with a new nominee, Senator Markwayne Mullin, Republican from Oklahoma. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7 on your local news, and of course tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report from New York. I'm Major Garrett. Good day.